Hey everyone, as probably every human on Earth knows by now, Shroud recently joined Sentinels to play professional Valorant. This ends his 5-year esports retirement and has the entire Valorant community split across two opinions. Opinion A and Opinion B.
Right now, they can't be stopped. They got Shroud! They got Shroud! They have Shroud! They have Shroud! They can't be stopped! They're gonna win it all!
Over 600,000 people tuned in to watch the debut of Sentinels Shroud, probably expecting to see one of those two realities confirmed. However, after seeing 3 close maps of wild but generally decent Valorant, I and probably most of you are likely asking the question, is there a future here? Is Shroud actually good enough to play pro Valorant at the tier 1 level? Well, luckily for you, I'm a massive nerd and manually tracked every single player's performance on every single map and agent at the most recent international LAN, Masters Copenhagen. So let's go ahead and use that data to compare Shroud to the world's best controller players and see how he stacks up. The first map began in almost fairy tale fashion, with Shroud finding the first kill of the entire event and following it up with 2 more in the second round. After 6 rounds of play, check out this scoreboard where all Sentinels players were definitely pulling their weight. Then after this 2 versus 4 round by Shroud and Tens, I'll be the first to admit that I started seriously considering that we might all exist in a Matrix-like simulation. I mean, really, are Shroud and Baby Shroud really about to take over this game? No, not exactly. Map 1 was a close one, with the guard coming back in the second half and Shroud slowly slipping down the leaderboard. But also, that's kind of a Viper game on Breeze some of the time, where the other team is going to just try to avoid playing into your defense, and the impact can be kind of hard. However, let's talk about the controller role a bit, since that is the position Shroud plays on the team. One of the most important parts about playing controller is staying alive, because your utility is so important. Another aspect is the ability to play out of tough situations as an anchor and find value. I mean, this play in particular is impressive because of how fast and violent the hit is from the guard, and Shroud does relatively well to even find a single kill here before dying. I also saw solid utility usage from Shroud, including some combo work that does require some practice to develop synergy and timing. And while he definitely racked up his fair share of deaths, getting out-aimed and steamrolled in some rounds, he also traded and spaced well too. Probably the best thing I saw from Shroud is his performance in crunch time. With the map hanging in the balance, he wins a 1v1 here to give Sentinels a lead, and then closes out the win on Breeze with a 3k spray down on the anchor in the next round. So how did he fare on Breeze overall? Let's take a quick look at all the Viper players from Masters Copenhagen on Breeze. Sorting by ACS or ADR gives us pretty similar order in their placement, and now let's go ahead and drop Shroud into the list, and well, that's actually a pretty solid performance. Sure, the KD ratio is a little low, but his kills, damage, and assists per round are all fairly comparable to what top tier Viper players were putting up on LAN. But one map is not the full story, is it? I'm not going to break down a bunch of highlights on maps 2 and 3 because, well, there weren't that many to look at. So let's instead hop right into the stats. Doing the same comparison as before, on Ascent we can see that Shroud had a tougher time as Sentinels dropped the map. His Astra play compared to the Masters Copenhagen controllers definitely lacked a bit of impact as well. From my perspective, he looked a little less comfortable on the Astra than on the Viper, but also played quite conservatively, focusing mostly on helping allies with his utility. This particular style of play is reflected in his solid assists per round that compares favorably to the Copenhagen Astras on Ascent. Team play was not as much of an issue as I thought it might be, as this round demonstrates. Here's Sentinels in a mid-round regroup execute that shows pretty good timing and spacing from Shroud and the rest of the team to coordinate the smokes, multiple scans, and an entry onto the site as they trade their way in for a plant. Map 3 proved to be another fairly rough one statistically for Shroud. Comparing his icebox performance to the Copenhagen crew, we can see his bottom placement in nearly every statistical category. This is noteworthy because icebox is definitely one of those maps where Vipers sometimes carry the game for their team. However, I should also mention that this weak impact from Shroud was not entirely his fault. The Sentinels employed a fairly different strategy to most teams who let their Sage do almost all of the spike planting, and this often results in horrendous stat lines for Sage players, as much of their gameplay is simply walling, planting, and dying. This has had some people questioning the strategy. Strategy aside, though, it's fair to say that Shroud underperformed in his role statistically on 2 of the 3 maps compared to the Masters of Copenhagen players. And yeah, he got aim diffed a few times by some of the freakish zoomers on the guard. Still, I thought he played a respectably good controller, and that alone is impressive considering the complete lack of experience that Shroud has in pro Valorant matches, and he has to get used to the speed and intensity of professional Valorant. The competition in the NALCQ is definitely lower than it was at Masters, so it's hard to say how Shroud would perform against the best of the best in the world. But with his intangibles, experience, and the fundamentally good play that I saw in his Sentinels debut, I would not be surprised if he could play at a tier 1 level with a bit more time to adjust to tournament level Valorant.
My takeaway is the fact that they were able to play those comps at such a level while having very little match experience with 2 players is pretty impressive. So I will give that to Sentinels.